The water hits the old man's head like a cold slap, cascading down his weathered face and soaking the orange jumpsuit that hangs loose on his thin frame. He doesn't flinch, doesn't even look up from the tray of cold rice and gray mystery meat in front of him. Behind him, the entire Cho Hall has gone dead silent. Every eye is locked on the mountain of muscle standing over him, the man they call Titan, the undisputed king of Cell Block D, grinning like a wolf who just found a wounded deer. The gold chain around Titan's thick neck glints under the fluorescent lights as he tilts the empty pitcher for dramatic effect, letting the last drops fall. "Welcome to my house, Grandpa," he growls, voice low enough to rattle the metal tables. First rule: old men eat on the floor. The laughter from his crew is immediate, sharp, obedient. But the old man just wipes the water from his eyes with a trembling hand, picks up his plastic spoon, and keeps eating. That single act of quiet defiance is the moment everything begins to unravel. Ta-ta, they called him Inmate 47291 in processing, but the name stitched on his jumpsuit reads W. Chen, 60, 8 years old, 5'6" in boots, 132 pounds soaking wet. When the guards shoved him through the sally port 3 days ago, half the block figured he wouldn't last a week. The other half started taking bets on how many hours. William Chen moved like someone carrying invisible weights. Shoulders rounded from decades of something no one here could guess, eyes the color of wet ash that seemed to look through people instead of at them. He spoke when spoken to, always soft, always polite, always with a faint accent that reminded the younger inmates of corner takeout spots and old kung fu movies they laughed at on bootleg DVDs. Easy prey. That was the universal verdict. Titan saw it the second Chen shuffled into the yard for the first time. Titan, whose real name no one dared use anymore, stood 6'7" and carried 300 pounds of prison iron and rage. Tattoos crawled up his neck like black ivy, telling stories of murders, gang wars, and a life sentence plus 30 that meant he had nothing left to lose and everything to rule. He ran the Black Vipers inside, controlled the phones, the drugs, the guards who looked the other way for the right price. And he loved breaking the new ones, especially the ones who thought silence was strength. He circled Chen that first afternoon like a shark smelling blood in the water, knocking the old man's state, issued hygiene kit from his arms, kicking the toothbrush across the concrete, watching those tired eyes for the spark of anger that never came. "You deaf, Chinaman?" Titan had asked. Chen only bowed his head slightly, gathered his things and walked away. The yard erupted. Titan's legend grew another inch. Ta-ta, but legends are fragile things when they're built on fear alone. Ta-ta, night after night in the dim glow of the tier lights, Chen sat on the edge of his lower bunk and stared at nothing. The young kid in the bunk above him, a carjacker named Marcus doing 18 months, whispered down one night, "Man, you gotta stand up to him or he'll kill you slow." Chen's answer was barely audible. "Some fights aren't won by standing up, young man. Some are won by never falling down." Marcus thought it was the lamest thing he'd ever heard, until the night the debt came due. Ta-da, it started with a phone call Titan didn't allow. A new fish owed the Vipers protection money, and tried to call his sister for help instead of paying. Titan decided an example needed to be made, the kind that leaves bruises on the soul more than the body. He chose Chen. Not because the old man was involved, but because he wasn't. Because breaking someone who had nothing to do with it sent the clearest message: no one is safe. At lights out, 6 Vipers slipped from their cells like shadows, with shanks fashioned from melted toothbrushes and razor blades melted into the handles. They dragged Chen from his bunk so quietly that Marcus only woke when the first punch landed. By the time the kid screamed for the guards, the pack had already hauled the old man down the tier toward the showers, where the cameras mysteriously went blind every third Thursday. Ta-ta, the shower room smelled of bleach and desperation. Titan waited under the single flickering bulb, shirt off, muscles gleaming like oiled bronze. He cracked his knuckles the way other men crack safes. "Time to dance, old man." The Vipers formed a semicircle, eager for the show. They shoved Chen into the center. His lip was already split, blood mixing with the water still dripping from the earlier pitcher incident. He stood there in his state shorts and shower slides, looking small, ancient, breakable. Titan stepped forward and swung a haymaker, meant to cave in the side of an old man's skull. Sedzo, the sound it made wasn't the wet crunch anyone expected. It was sharper, cleaner, like a branch snapping under fresh snow. Titan's arm stopped midair, caught, impossibly, by a hand that looked too frail to hold anything heavier than chopsticks. Chen's fingers were wrapped around Titan's wrist in a grip that felt like iron cables. The big man's eyes widened, first in confusion, then in genuine shock, because no matter how hard he pulled, his arm would not come free. The shower room went still enough to hear the drip of a leaking faucet. Then Chen moved. Though it wasn't flashy. No flying kicks, no movie screams. Just economy of motion so pure it looked like time itself stuttered. A short twist of the hips, a shift of weight, and Titan, 300 pounds of prison, hardened fury, found himself airborne. He crashed into the tile wall hard enough to crack it, the air exploding from his lungs in a sound that was half roar, half whimper. Before the first Viper could process what his eyes were telling him, Chen was already among them. An elbow here, precise, surgical, dropping a man to his knees, clutching his throat. A palm strike to the chest of another that sent him skidding across the wet floor, like he'd been hit by a car. The shanks clattered uselessly as wrists bent in directions nature never intended. 30 seconds. That was all it took. 30 seconds for 6 predators to become 6 broken men moaning on the concrete. Titan tried to rise, blood streaming from his nose, hatred burning hotter than the pain. He lunged again, this time with everything he had. Chen sidestepped, almost gently, placed one calloused hand on the back of the giant's neck, and guided him face first into the metal stall divider. The clang echoed like a church bell. Titan dropped and did not get up. Silence returned, heavier than before. Chen stood in the center, breathing slow and even, the way a man breathes after folding laundry. His jumpsuit was torn, his knuckles raw, but his eyes carried the same quiet exhaustion they always had. He looked down at Titan's unconscious form and spoke so softly only the leaking faucet heard. I never wanted this. The guards found them 5 minutes later. The official report called it an altercation with multiple assailants. The cameras, miraculously repaired, showed nothing useful, but the prison grapevine works faster than fiber optic. By morning Cho, every soul in the facility knew the old man wasn't prey. He was something else entirely. Cheta William Chen had not always been inmate 47291, 50 years earlier. In a smoky temple courtyard high in the mountains of Guangdong, a 12-year-old boy with the same tired eyes had bowed to a white, bearded master and begun learning an art most of the world now only saw in grainy Bruce Lee clips. Wing Chun, the style of the snake and the crane, taught not to the strong, but to the clever, the patient, the ones who understood that real power sometimes wears the face of weakness. Chen trained until his hands bled, until he could catch flies with chopsticks, until his Sifu told him one winter night, "You have learned all I can teach. Now go live quietly." So he did. He immigrated to San Francisco's Chinatown in the 70s, opened a tiny herbal shop beneath a neon dragon sign, taught a handful of students who never knew how good he really was, married a woman with laughing eyes who died too young, and raised a daughter who became a doctor and begged him to retire to Arizona. He almost made it. Chao, the crime that put him behind bars was not violence. It was loyalty. When a local gang targeted his last student, a teenage boy who reminded Chen of himself at 12, the old master stepped in the only way he knew how. One night, 3 gang members with guns and bad intentions kicked in the shop door. They left on stretchers. Chen left in handcuffs. The judge called it excessive force. The boy called it the reason he was still breathing. The sentence was 10 years. Chen took it without complaint, because complaining would have dishonored everything his Sifu ever taught him. But prisons are not temples. And some lessons have to be relearned the hard way. In the days that followed the shower incident, The power structure inside the walls shifted like tectonic plates. Titan woke up in the infirmary with a fractured orbit, 3 cracked ribs, and the terrifying realization that his empire had been built on the assumption that no one could touch him. Men who once flinched at his shadow now looked away when Chen walked past. Not out of fear of the old man, but out of respect, the kind of respect that doesn't need tattoos or loud voices. Marcus, the kid from the upper bunk, started calling him Sifu. Without thinking, others followed. Quietly a circle formed around the old man during yard time. Not a gang, something older. Students. Tata Chen never asked for it. He tried to discourage it at first, telling them he was just a tired old fool who got lucky once. But when a skinhead crew cornered Marcus a week later for tax on the phones, and Chen stepped between them with the same calm that had dropped Titan, the skinheads backed down without a punch thrown. Word spread further. The legend grew roots. Sadza Titan watched all of it from the corners of his eyes, nursing wounds both physical and otherwise. Hate became obsession. Obsession became a plan. He still had soldiers on the outside, still had favors owed by guards with gambling debts. And he had time. In prison, time is the one thing no one runs out of until they're dead. Sadza, the final confrontation came on a day when the sky over the yard was the color of a fresh bruise. Titan had arranged it perfectly. A shakedown that emptied the guards from the weight pen. A distraction in the kitchen. A blind spot behind the bleachers, where no camera could see. 20 Vipers this time, armed with sock, wrapped bars of soap filled with batteries, real weapons smuggled in piece by piece. They came for blood and for the restoration of a throne. Sarja Chen was lifting the rusted barbell when they closed the circle. He set the weight down gently, the way a man sets down fine china, and turned to face them. 20 against 1. The odds were laughable. Except no one was laughing. Toita Titan stepped forward, face still swollen purple from their last meeting, eyes burning with something beyond rage. This ends today, old man, one way or another. Cha Chen looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time, something like sadness crossed his features. You still don't understand, he said quietly. It never had to begin. Cha, what happened next would be spoken of in whispers for years. No one could quite agree on the details afterward, because human eyes aren't built to track motion that precise. They saw the first Viper swing, saw Chen flow under the arc like water around a stone. They saw bodies drop in waves, not from wild punches but from touches, light as a lover's, that somehow shattered knees and elbows and dreams. They saw Titan charge like a bull, roaring, only to find empty air where the old man had been. And then, in the eye of the storm, Chen did something no one expected. He stopped. Tietza just stopped. Tita stood in the center of the carnage, hands open at his sides, and looked at Titan with those ancient eyes. Enough, he said. One word. Not loud. But it carried the weight of every sunrise he'd watched from temple steps, every tear he'd shed at his wife's grave, every promise he'd made to never become the violence he'd spent a lifetime mastering. Teta. Titan raised the metal pipe he'd been saving for this moment. His arms shook. Tears of pure fury cut trails through the sweat on his face. He wanted to swing. God, he wanted to swing. But something in Chen's gaze held him frozen, the same way Chen's grip had frozen him in the shower weeks before. Only this was deeper. This wasn't about strength of body. This was strength of soul, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself anymore. Tata, the pipe clattered to the ground. Jata Titan sank to his knees, not from pain but from the sudden, crushing realization that he had spent his entire life being the biggest monster in every room, and it had never once made him feel safe. Chen stepped forward slowly and placed a gentle hand on the crying giant's shoulder. It's never too late, the old man whispered, to choose something else. Chata, the guards arrived minutes later to a scene they couldn't explain. 20 hardened criminals on the ground, some weeping, some staring at the sky like they were seeing it for the first time. And in the middle, an old man in an orange jumpsuit helping a broken king to his feet. Teda, William Chen served the rest of his sentence in peace. The circle of students grew, not into a gang, but into something the warden didn't have a name for. Young men who learned to breathe before they swung, to carry themselves like they had futures worth protecting. When Chen walked out the front gate 6 years later, gray hair now snow white, 100 inmates stood at the fence in silence. No cheering, just respect. Marcus was there, paroled 2 years early for good behavior he credited entirely to the old man's quiet lessons. Titan was there too, thinner, calmer, reading books on gardening, because Chen once told him every life can be replanted if given half a chance. Since the last anyone saw of William Chen, he was boarding a Greyhound bus with a small canvas bag and a one-way ticket to Arizona, where his daughter waited with grandchildren he'd never met. He sat by the window, watching the prison shrink in the distance, and for the first time in 10 years, he smiled. Said, and that, my friends, is the day the baddest man in the hardest prison in the state learned that real strength doesn't roar. Sometimes it just refuses to fall. Cha-cha. So tell me in the comments, have you ever met someone who seemed weak on the outside, but carried unbreakable strength within? What's the most legendary act of quiet courage you've ever witnessed? Drop your stories below, because these are the tales that remind us who we can still become. If this one hit you in the chest the way it did me, smash that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe for more cinematic stories of redemption, justice, and the kind of heroes the world almost overlooked. Until next time, stay dangerous in the best possible way. Peace.